And they had all those temporary no park.
Welcome everybody to the 4 o'clock hour. It's Business Monday here at Go Local Live. I'm Josh Fenton. This is Cha-Ching, the money man, Gary Sasse, man of great wealth, influence, power, academic, mighty man up at Bryant University, former director of administration for the state of Rhode Island, former head of RIPEC. You've done it. You've seen it all. It's a sunny day in Rhode Island for the first time in we don't know how long. Let's talk a little bit about the end of the week news last week. I can't remember ever a governor of Rhode Island being in three different major business publications, 4 different pieces, 3 up, 1 down, 3 down, 1 up. 2 in the Wall Street Journal, an editorial on Friday, a commentary piece by one of the editorial writers on Saturday, another damning piece from Ted Seidel in Forbes, and a positive piece on job growth by Business Week. What's your take on this fury of national business attention towards Governor Raimondo?
Well, Abraham Lincoln said it. And he said you could fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. I think she brought a lot of this on herself for 2 reasons. One, obviously this administration is very PR conscious. And, with her contacts outside the state, they certainly have looked for national publicity and national coverage.
And they've gotten a lot, and historically, really until this bout, fairly positive,
yeah, but
primarily positive.
But when you deal, with the press, you have to assume the more attention you get, the closer they look at you. Mm-hmm. So with all the attention, it was inevitable that there would be stories that didn't paint things in the rosy way that they have been selling the story. The second, issue is that what's happened, and this I think is very disturbing to the press. And once the ink is out of the jar, it's not going to be put back in. There'll be other press that'll be looking at this as well. The story is that she's veered off course. She came in as a great state pension reformer, though we're paying more for our pension than before these great reforms. As a pension reformer, she came in using fiscal subsidies to promote economic development. Economic development and jobs were job number 1, and that, you agree or disagree with some of the specifics, that fact was the program. Then all of a sudden, you stick your head out of the sand pile, and you find that she's increasing taxes on anything that can walk, a traditional tax and spend approach to budgeting. The taxes are being increased while the deficits are growing. New programs are being put online, and there seemed to be a disconnect between what Gina said she was and what the state was doing. I spoke to some Wall Street Journal people. There were 1,500 jobs lost because of the pay day.
The Medicaid?
Not the Medicaid, but the days that you could take off, paid leave days.
Oh, paid leave days,
yeah. There were 1,500 jobs that I'm told they found. I didn't find it, but they did. Medicaid, we warned her. We said, if you expand Medicaid as fast as you're expanding it, the money has to come from somewhere. And the answer was a glib answer. Well, the feds are paying for it. Well, the feds are paying for 90% of it. That's true.
Yeah.
But 10% is a lot of money when you increase your Medicaid roll by 60%. Medicaid spending is increased by 25%. She claims she's going to cut Medicaid spending by $20 million. So the promises made about a more efficient, leaner, meaner, a better service-oriented government, holding the line on taxes, being pro-business, don't square, and so people are going to write stories when they find it. That's a story.
Let's talk about Friday's piece. Friday was an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, zeroed in on the budget. It talked about a real shift to a tax-first, spend-first strategy, different from a pragmatist type of techno-democrat that she had been perceived to be. Then Saturday's piece was different. Saturday's piece was by another member of the editorial board. It was a commentary piece about the shift towards unions and that there was a pivot towards a more progressive part of the Democratic Party, giving them the evergreen contracts, giving firefighters the lower number for overtime, mandatory hours. Those are two pretty big shifts and two pretty big beat-ups. And And why they're important is, as you're trying to go out and recruit businesses, one thing about the Wall Street Journal editorial page, every CEO, male or female, reads that page. Might not always agree with the Wall Street Journal editorial page, but that's a must-read for anybody in business in America.
Well, I've gotten phone calls from people I know outside the state, and the question is what was happening. But as an evangelical, there's always redemption, and she has a chance to redeem herself very soon. And one of the ways she can redeem herself is by vetoing the public sector union bills. The Evergreen Bill, which keeps contracts in place until the new ones are negotiated, the changing the overtime pay of firefighters. If she vetoes those bills, then she can reestablish some equilibrium. So it's not necessarily what's in those bills, but it's perception of how she's going to respond to those bills. And the perception is vivid because last year she wrote an extremely effective and strong veto message on the Evergreen contract bill.
Right.
I mean, it's worthy of quoting again. So, and she can't claim and keep a straight face, well, the bill is different this year. Yeah, it may be arranged differently, but the bill does what the bill does, and they're identical in terms of what they do. And so that will be a great case. There's both political judgments in there. She'll have to offend certain of her political friends if she vetoes the bill. But he's at a kind of a Waterloo here as to, what do I stand for? Who am I? Am I the Gina that wants to straighten this place out and have balance between business and labor? Or I veered off course. So we'll know in 10 days, because I imagine that the Evergreen bill will probably pass out of the legislature this week and will be on our desk next week.
Do you think they'll move it before the end of the session and put it in front of her for consideration?
I think,
or will it be tied to the budget and any other big bills that are remaining at the end of the session?
No, they have the votes to override her if she vetoes it right now, based on what the vote was. But it would give her an opportunity to reestablish her credibility. I'm not holding my breath, but it would give her the opportunity to reestablish her credibility. The other thing which is really painful as a Rhode Islander is not the specifics, not that our governor was criticized. Nobody wants their governor, whether you're for her, her and her political party or with her ideology, criticized, because it hurts all of us. A lot of people in the state, not perfectly, for the last several years worked very hard to improve Rhode Island's reputation as a business-friendly state. The legislature, starting with the Cucheria, when I worked in the Cucheria administration, we cut the top marginal income tax rate from almost 11% to a little under 6%. Subsequent legislatures have carried on and got rid of the corporate tax. We took the sales tax off utility purchases. A lot of things were done. We established, I think, at the Department of Labor and Training, a really good workforce training program. We're certainly better than we've had. So a lot of people worked very hard to improve the reputation of the state. Tax Foundation, instead of being in the worst 10, we're 37th. At least you don't get a headline with your name on it in the worst 10.
Right.
So what are you, 37th or 32nd or 25th? You're not in the worst 10. So a lot of things were done to improve the reputation of the state. And those things, reputational risk is quick. You can turn that around in a New York minute. And what this publicity is doing, because the Wall Street Journal is right, it's not a question where we want to write a letter to the Wall Street Journal and say, you missed a fact. I remember when Bruce was, I think it was governor, right before he was governor, they had a negative story about Rhode Island, about a dirty, grimy place.
It was under Governor Dupree. It was a dirty, grimy place from when you're driving to Cape Cod.
Well, we got on Sunland Air Force and went down to the Wall Street Journal and met with them and complained about the editorial because we felt we were wrong. No one's going to write a letter or go down to see the Wall Street Journal and say, "Boy, your facts were wrong." They were entitled to their own opinions, but the facts. And so we got to be very careful. And and I joke about it a little bit, but it's really quite a serious issue. The reputational risks from having a leader who says one thing and then does something else, and the something else that is done is not seen as business friendly, it can create a problem for you, which will take years to overcome.
Listen, we talked about it. I know we've editorialized about this budget, about sort of the lack of direction and the penny ante, nickel and diming structure of this budget construct. Where does she go? She dazzled much of the business community. Hedge funds. She won the Manhattan Institute Award for her leadership on pension reform. She got glowing articles in the Washington Post, and the New York Times, and the in the Wall Street Journal, and now it's spiraling undone. How does she's still got 3+ years as governor of Rhode Island. How does she address this recent criticism and build a new narrative to protect Rhode Island's reputation?
Well, I'm going to dance with the guy that brought me. She has to go back and dance with the people that brought her. And a couple of things she can do. I mentioned one. She can veto the labor bills, which are very hurtful to property taxpayers, and really take things away from city and town government, to take their authority to govern. Actually, that's a start. She can look at the deficit and in the budget negotiations say, boy, I sure as hell like to do all the things I put on the table. Obviously we can't afford them, and the first priority has to be to get this budget stabilized, so we can't afford them without going back on the principles of things that she wanted to achieve. And then she has to begin to really reevaluate how we do economic development in the state. It has been taught in business schools, before they had business schools, that if you want that the competitive states make the most productive use of their resources, whether they're people or institutional resources or environmental resources, and to have an innovative economy, you have to have a productive economy. It needs to go back and say, okay, we used our crony capital programs at Commerce, Rhode Island. They were fine, and we still need some because other states have them. We can't just be out naked, but we have to change the emphasis now. We have to evaluate what we've done and make some mid-course corrections, and the mid-course corrections need to be focused on the kinds of structural reforms that can turn this place around, because we're not going to create jobs by using the old paradigms. The number of manufacturing jobs, but 30 years ago was about 24% of employment.
Right.
It's 8% of employment
right
now.
Absolutely.
But production is up. So that's the interesting thing. And production is up because of technology and automation, and it's up because American companies are overseas making products they sell overseas. That's right. And so that's not going to happen. Retail is changing. She needs to really capture the public's attention, and that she's on the cutting edge of economic development. She's looking at artificial intelligence. She's not playing around with this Promise Rhode Island program, which is not going to change the economy, very much. So I think those are three things that you do: get more realistic on the budget, veto things that are viewed as not improving the business climate of the state, helping management, and then retooling her economic development efforts. Those are what I would do.
Today we had 2 CEOs in E-Money Advisor went through the incentive program. 110 employees right over here in 100 Westminster. Not in the Superman building next door.
That's where you are asking me, the Superman building.
Yeah, the Superman building's a little bit vacant for 6 years. The second, you met the gentleman, Todd from Snap Chef, coming into Rhode Island, working to train folks, job training for institutional food industry. Folks are interested in coming here and building their businesses. I guess the question is, how do you stand up? Wall Street Journal is now putting Rhode Island in the same bucket as Connecticut, which is an economic basket case, ridiculed both on political and on business shows, on all cable networks, pretty much 24/7. From Fox to MSNBC, they all criticize Connecticut. We're now getting put in that same bucket.
But in the last several months, Connecticut's performed better.
It's absolutely true.
If you look at the rate of
job production,
yeah. Isn't that great? We're like 0.39. We're about 1/3 of a percent. They're about 0.6%. Yeah. The rest of the world's at 2%, but we won't tell you about that. But no, it's that what I've just described is the fact. We need a kind of new, what I would call, not liberal. Or,
is this a Raimondo 2.0 moment? Does she need to listen? The first invention of her was pension reform. The second, maybe this is 3.0. The second iteration of Gina Raimondo in the public persona was somebody who's going to spark the economy and bring companies here. Okay, that's part 2. Do we now need Gina Raimondo 3.0 as an economic driver, not, from your standpoint, not another progressive Democrat? And is she on the border with these new taxes coupled with these two major union pieces of legislation, is she right on the cusp of leaving that sort of thoughtful, pro-business Democrat and falling back into the old line of progressive, tax it away, give it away?
Well, her proposals since re-election, suggest that. The budget's been panned, certainly been panned by people up at the State House.
Certainly.
And the business,
Universally, Democrats and Republicans.
it's clearly a tax and spend budget. It pays no attention to the structural deficits. It grows at twice the rate of inflation. It adds, I think, 200 full-time FTE positions. It wants to do more on free tuition. It wants to universal pre-K, all good programs. At the same time, a report comes out saying that the performance in our public schools is way behind our neighbor. As a matter of fact, if Rhode Island was one district, we'd be in the bottom 10% of Massachusetts, schools. And so when facts change, people's opinions have to change. If she is a progressive liberal, that's fine. Or if she's a conservative, that's fine. But what she needs to be is a pragmatic moderate. And moderation is not about ideology. It's not about being a conservative or a liberal. Moderation is the way you govern, by facts, by compromise, by balance. And what the perception I read from those Wall Street Journal articles is that she's veered from pragmatism. And she's veered from pragmatism with a soft, and it's been complicated by the economy softening. Now, no one should blame, the governors get too much credit, too much blame when the economy gets bad or weak. So I'm not going to sit here and blame the governor for the softening economy, just as I will praise it to the hills for the strong economy.
Well, I think there is an X factor, though, that there is a comparison marker, which is that the U.S. economy, especially in jobs, continues to perform exceptionally well. Friday's job numbers were unexpectedly high. I think it was for 230,000.
263.
263. I mean, nobody expected that. Rhode Island, we'll wait to see what the April numbers are for Rhode Island, but we're on 5 months of job losses.
Yeah, but keep in mind, too, and this is why the analysis has to be a little more detailed than that. If you take a snapshot and you say, we've lost 10,000 jobs since December, and the country has gained millions of jobs, and Massachusetts has gained thousands of jobs.
Yeah. Gazillions. I think
okay.
In Massachusetts they use gazillions for every economic number.
And so as you get behind that number, that's why I said there's noise, and you look at sector by sector where we've lost jobs, you can identify administrative services, security services, sanitation services, and you go through a list of them. You get to the job losses, but there have been no major layoffs. There have been no major companies losing the state. So I am very curious to understand what kind of noise are in these numbers. The demographics are terrible. Our population stays flat. We get older, not younger. And so we need to see that, but that should be enough of a caution flag to the governor that, well, there may be noise in the numbers, there may be a lot of extraneous factors, but what are you doing? This is why I think people are frustrated. Okay, we've lost 10,000 jobs. The economy here is slower than the economy elsewhere. What are you doing? What kind of course correction do you need to make? People have every right to change their opinions and positions as conditions change. And that's what's called moderate pragmatism. And I think that's what was a strength. No one ever made the mistake of saying Gina Romano was a conservative, but she was pragmatic. And it seems now that we've gone from a way of governing.
Well, I think Progressive called her a conservative. I think Matt Brown called her.
Well, yeah, but that's political,
Right.
And now I'm just having a good old time watching, Biden calls. They let them argue and shoot each other. That's fine. But that's intramural. That's not business of all of us. But she gained her reputation by being pragmatic.
Absolutely.
By saying she was willing to say no to typical constituents. People don't see that anymore. People need to ask the question, okay, what's the next big challenge we're going to take on? Is it artificial intelligence? Is it education, but real reform in education, not putting boutique programs, around the basic system?
Let's jump to education. Tomorrow afternoon, the official unveiling of the House and Senate Education Reform Bill will take place, I think, at 3:30 in the afternoon with both the Speaker and the Senate President. Go Local last week broke the preview. News editor Kate Nagel spoke with Greg Amori, one of the authors of the legislation. Representative Amori, who's a teacher over in East Providence, I think he's the athletic director at the high school now, said, listen, this legislation mirrors Massachusetts. That's what our intent is, and we think that that's the right framework for here. Is this the opportunity for the governor to jump on board with this and help drive real reform, a major progression in how we structure education, and has to be done in about five weeks up at the General Assembly?
Well, let's see the legislation. I think there are a couple of things that will be in the legislation that will attempt to mirror Massachusetts. Curriculum frameworks.
Yep.
More emphasis on school-based management. Those are things Massachusetts did. But Massachusetts also did a few other things. They put a hell of a lot of money into it. We talked about this before.
Right. Last week we talked about.
They were realistic in what they could fund because they had the courts leaning over their shoulder. They included high-stakes testing. They dealt with teacher evaluation tied to the tests, as a matter of fact. And so if you do 20% or 30% or 40% of what Massachusetts has done, is that a down payment, and we're going to do the other 40% soon, next year? Is that the end of the ball game? You're asking me things to comment on that I really don't know and haven't seen the specifics.
Well, that's why we get together every week, so we're always up to date on what's taking place.
Next time we can talk about it. But my sense is that if you want to emulate Massachusetts,
you got to do it all. You
can't
cheat. You can't just pick and choose the easy ones that the unions are going to go along with. You've got to do the complete package.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last Tuesday night, Mayor Alorza delivered his annual budget address. He had some new spending programs. He had no change in how he's addressing the unfunded liability of the pension structure. I believe on Monday, while we were speaking, General Treasurer Magaziner released his report on the status of all the different pension reforms. There's an unfunded liability across the state at the municipal levels of about $2.5 billion. More than 1.3 of that 2.5 is tied to the Providence Pension Fund. The Providence Pension Fund has an assumption of an 8% rate of return. Pretty much unheard of today in financial, municipal or state structuring, according to an analysis that we did of hundreds of different pension plans across the country. Many are at 7%, many are at 6%, and a few equal to the number that are at 8%, which is 6, are also at 5%. What's your thought on this kicking of the proverbial pension can, down the street?
Boy, if it was an easy problem, it would have been solved. I looked at one chart which I found interesting, and it showed the percentage of the budget that was used to make the ARC.
Right.
Okay. And if they did nothing, it went up like this. So instead of taking 22, I think it's 22% of the budget now.
Yep.
In a very short period of time, it was 40%. It was really driving money out. So they need to, adopt a policy of saying, how can we keep our pension cost at no more than, I'll just pick a number out of the air, 25%
Yep.
of budget. And then, get with the stakeholders and design a program that achieves that. Selling the assets obviously is not something that would achieve that, and certainly politically it's not going to happen. Telling the mayor just to put more money into pensions and do more on property taxes, that is a difficult answer. So I don't have answer to that question. I think it gets down to this: if a community falls below 60% for 3 to 5 consecutive years of its funded pension is less than 60% for a period of time, then I think the state has to come in and act as a master. And I think
Providence is now at 26.3%,
Exactly.
and it's been below 60% for probably 30 years.
Yeah. So, but you have to start when you start.
Do we have to start a new clock, or can we go retroactive to the previous 30 years?
I think you could.
Don't we run a huge risk, though? Providence is a little different from West Warwick, right?
Yeah.
If West Warwick failed, Rhode Island could deal with it. Rhode Island has a $9 billion budget. The gap is millions. In the case of Providence, if the stock market were to perform and potentially turn negative at some time in the future, estimation of an 8% rate of return, coupled with a 4% limit on increasing taxes, there is a inflection point in which the city literally cannot afford to make the pension payments of the lowest level that it's required
and
to make.
the inflection point
Is a recession away.
Is more than that because of the retirees and people that are entitled.
There's more retirees in the plan than there are those paying.
I've always felt that there are contractual obligations to people that are on pensions. So the first place you go is you stop the bleeding. If you're digging a hole, you stop digging, and just to change the pension going forward for people that are not vested in the system. You need Plan B.
You need a second tier.
Yeah,
you need
some
kind of 401k.
And you need a 20-year get-well plan. You can't possibly do this in a year or two, maybe a 30-year get-well plan. But I think the only way you get there is by giving somebody some extraordinary power to do it. I don't think that this council, and past councils, and this mayor have the political will, or not just the political will, but the clout in dealing with some of the unions in City Hall to do the draconian kind of changes that you need to make to get up to 60% funding. So my first reaction would be that communities, I would pick, and you're right, if Providence fails, it becomes more of a national, statewide issue. But I think you have to have some kind of state intervention. You can't just focus on Providence. For communities that are, let's say, less than 60, but let's say, or 30%, just say that they're so far down that the state has to come and intervene and give somebody extraordinary powers to make the adjustments going forward. There's no other way.
So the state retirement system's only funded at a little less than 60%. I think it's at 58%.
It's around 60%.
Yeah, and then if you added in Providence, West Warwick, I think it's Johnston, those are the
Central
ones.
Falls.
Central Falls, those four are in sort of the critical stage. I think they're all around 30%. Don't hold me to it, but it's somewhere around there. You would push the state's retirement system probably down to around 50%. Potentially, because the Providence number is so large.
Well, there's always a question too, and I don't have the details of how you deal with MERS and restructure the system. I think one of the tragic things of 2012 is that we did a reasonable job in trying to deal with the state pension and totally punted on the local pensions.
Absolutely.
And I would imagine, I don't know the reason, but I have a pretty good guess, that the governor was told, if you want to get the state fixed, stay away from the locals.
Right.
We would not take the political heat of doing both. And I think now the political heat has gotten so hot. And also, and your point's well taken, you want to fix every system, but you have to also prioritize which systems have the biggest impact on the economic well-being, economic health of the state.
Well, the problem with Providence is it's almost too big to fail, but also too big for the state of Rhode Island to fix. At a 1.365, I think, unfunded liability, that's a massive obligation for the state to take on.
That's why you have to make structural changes. But if you're convinced that the city does not have the political ability to make those changes, then you got to create an alternative.
They certainly have not in my adult lifetime shown any inclination.
Angel made some progress, but I think that was a good start. I think now somebody at the legislature has to lay down the law. Instead of laying down the laws on evergreen contracts, which are not going to hurt local property taxpayers, why didn't the legislature focus on things to help cities and towns, even though it's bitter medicine? And we would be better off, legislature, having a debate on legislation that would give the state some extraordinary authority, or somebody some extraordinary authority to require the local pension plans to be funded in a more responsible way.
Gary Sasse, the Money Man, we touched it all. We talked about national business press attention to Rhode Island and their critique of Governor Raimondo's performance this year. We've talked about education reform, what needs to take place in the leadership, House and Senate leadership bill that's being unveiled tomorrow, and we've also talked about the Providence pension fund. Anything else we need to talk about? What about this Dunkin' Donuts cup in the middle of the set on the Game of Thrones last night? What's going on there? And for a guy like you, Southerner, probably down there drinking his mint juleps down at the Kentucky Derby, how much did you lose when the favorite got disqualified?
I love the Derby. I've never bet a penny.
Never bet a penny.
Never
When
bet a
you
penny.
own the horses, you don't even bet. Gary Sass, thanks
My
so much.
horses plow fields. Not around Derby.
Gary Sass, the Money Man, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in for about as jam-packed a Business Monday as we could have. We've talked to Venezuela, 2 CEOs, and the creme de la creme, the Money Man, Gary Sass at the Hassenfeld Institute at Bryant University. Tomorrow afternoon, we are going to be talking with Haiti, I believe at the 3 o'clock hour, about an issue that's developing, as well as Kate Nagel, news editor, has got Jennifer Lawless and others tomorrow afternoon. Jennifer Lawless, the endowed chair down at University of Virginia Political Science Department. Always big insights into what's going on Capitol Hill. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.